Of all the intellectual properties that exist today, none of them mean more to me than Star Wars. I love everything about it. The lore, the worlds, the aliens and races, the Jedi, the Sith, all of it. The lightsaber to me stands above every fantasy weapon ever imagined. To me, it's the pinnacle, the perfect fusion of myth and machinery, a magic sword born from science fiction. There is nothing like a lightsaber, and on paper, it's a money printing machine, which only makes it harder to understand how on earth Disney could make Star Wars unprofitable.
Oh, I forgot. You're broken. I don't want to play with you anymore.
Now, I didn't grow up seeing the original trilogy in theaters, but I vividly remember the day my dad took my brother and I to see The Phantom Menace. Darth Maul was the coolest thing my young mind had ever encountered, and like so many others, I was instantly obsessed. Nothing could have prepared me for the double-bladed lightsaber, a concept I had never even thought was possible. Now, I love staves as a weapon, and being able to spin them and make flowering patterns in combat looks really cool, so turning a lightsaber into that was just mind-blowing for me at that age. And from then on, I was on my way to consume everything Star Wars had to offer. But, and honestly this is a little sad, since The Last Jedi, there hasn't been anything I've avoided more than Star Wars. It stopped feeling like a galaxy full of possibility and started feeling like a wide, empty stretch. A vast desert planet wasteland where ambitions fade, sand embedded with the hollow bones of what I once loved. During COVID, I ended up picking up a game on a whim that would change everything. Elden Ring. I had never played a Souls game before. I didn't understand the genre, the reputation, or the appeal, but something in it awakened a new feeling in me, and it set me on a journey to pursue all variety of Souls-like games, and I've fallen head first, chasing that sense of mastery, precision, and growth wherever I could find it. Now, because I was actively avoiding Star Wars at the time, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order completely passed me by. I remember seeing ads and hearing people talk about it, but at the time I was really deep into Final Fantasy XIV, and Star Wars just wasn't something I was open to revisiting. It wasn't until I learned that Fallen Order carried Souls-like DNA that the door cracked open again. It features precision defense, deliberate combat, force powers layered over Prince of Persia style platforming and exploration, and honestly that sounds like a combination that's too perfect to ignore. I had to play it, and I'm genuinely glad that I did. Fallen Order didn't just surprise me mechanically, it reminded me what it feels like to want to be in the Star Wars universe again. So, let's break the combat down, go over why it works and why it resonated with me and how Fallen Order managed to pull me back into a galaxy far, far away. Now before I get into this review though, I just want to be upfront about one thing. The PC version of this game is not well optimized or ported at all. The stuttering was severe and it made it borderline unplayable. There were a few times where I thought I wasn't going to be able to review this game, that's how bad it was. So, to make the experience smoother, I found a mod on Nexus that helped stabilize performance, and while I was at it, I ended up grabbing this Jedi outfit as well, and so I just want to be transparent about that up front since you'll see modded footage during the review. I didn't change anything about the game or how it plays or how the combat works, but it did make the experience at least playable on PC. With that, let's break down the offensive basics. Now, Fallen Order gives you one weapon to work with, but two forms of that weapon. You start off with the single saber, and not long into Dathomir you get the double saber. They both share the same skill tree with branches that are specific to them. Nodes that they share have the same input method, but with different effects. So, for this review, we'll do something a little different. We'll evaluate both at the same time to illustrate the differences. So, let's begin. X is our basic attack, and you can keep pressing X to do a 3-step combo with 2 subsequent presses. The single saber hits with slower, heavier strikes, whereas the double saber does more dexterous strikes and hits multiple times per input. You can also jump while attacking. Now this is important because it allows you to maintain offensive pressure when fighting enemies that force you to jump to evade. The first node that you unlock is a force or heavy attack. For the single saber, it's an overhead slash downward, and for the double saber, it's an overhead spinning attack that hits multiple times. The single saber advances to a second slash, and the double saber advances to a throw attack that hits in a circle. Holding Y will execute a dashing strike, and it's relatively the same for both weapons. This attack is great for closing distance for heavy damage and for following up a knockback. You can also jump at the end of the dash to do a leaping strike behind the enemy. When you unlock it, holding guard and pressing Y will cause you to do a saber throw. I didn't use it a lot before I unlocked the split saber special attack, but once you have the split saber, you can keep half the saber to continue attacking while the saber is coming back to you. This is really useful, and it's great to mix in with your moment-to-moment combinations. Eventually, you unlock the weapon transition, and you can do them mid-combo. Holding down X will let you mix in a weapon stance swap. Cal will do a heavy attack to transition into the other weapon form. This is also really great to mix in, and I got a lot of mileage out of this once I got over just using the double saber and I accepted using the single saber more, but you'll see what I mean. Finally, after a certain part of the story, you unlock a special attack that splits the saber in half, doing a dual strike with the weapon, and it does a ton of damage. This is also really great to mix in with your attacks once you've broken an enemy's guard or to break an enemy's guard. Now, attacking with abilities that use force like the heavy attack, the dash strike, the saber throw, and the split attack will use some of your force meter. Attacking with basic attacks will build your force meter back up. So you want to do a mix of basic attacks and force attacks to overcome your foes. Eventually, you'll unlock building force through blocking, precision dodging, and defeating enemies, and that helps a lot with keeping your force high enough to last for an entire fight. Now, I'll be honest, being able to use a double saber fluidly like this is a dream come true for me, and so I almost used it exclusively during the story. But both weapons absolutely have their place, so don't follow my example. The single saber is sometimes the smarter and more effective option. I'm stubborn, and I made things harder on myself than necessary, something I'll get into more when we talk about defense, but for now, the distinction is simple. The single saber hits harder, with slower, heavier swings built for duels, while the double saber trades raw damage for speed, landing more hits through dexterous rapid strikes. Different tools, different answers, but the same core combat philosophy. Now, the game kind of defines the double saber as being good for dealing with multiple enemies, and while that's kind of true for like small ones, I disagree that it's not as effective, or I would challenge the idea that it's not as effective in fighting a single target enemy, because in some ways the double saber is able to apply really good pressure to the foe that you're fighting, and the single saber just hits really hard when you land and it breaks guard easier, but the double saber does a great job of applying pressure, and so I got a lot of use out of it. Alongside your weapon attacks, you also have force powers, and this is another area where Fallen Order really makes a smart design decision. Instead of turning force abilities into a spell wheel you constantly have to toggle through like the spells and incantations in Elden Ring, each power is mapped cleanly to a specific input, and a single button press executes exactly what you intend. There's no friction, no menu fighting, just immediate access, which keeps the combat and the exploration flowing seamlessly. The right button activates slow, and I'll be honest, I almost never used it in combat. For me, it might as well have been a story-only power. I reject the idea of freezing an enemy in place just to cut them down. That's simply not how I like to engage with combat. Now by contrast, right trigger pushes enemies and objects while left trigger will pull them, and both have clear, tangible combat applications, like pulling an enemy off balance or pushing them into hazards, breaking formations. These powers feel physical, intentional, and grounded. What I really love here, and something developers almost never get this right, is that Respawn treated combat abilities as real within the world, not just abstractions for gameplay. Think about like Final Fantasy VII. Let me ask you, are limit breaks real, or are they just an in-combat game mechanic, but they're never discussed or used outside of the turn-based combat system? Well, Final Fantasy Advent Children confirms that they actually are part of the universe. The characters really can do those things, and they exist beyond just the UI. Fallen Order applies that same philosophy to the Force, kind of. These powers aren't just tools for combat, they're how you interact with the world. You use them to solve puzzles, navigate environments, and unlock progression. The Force is consistently represented as a real, living element of the universe, and not something that magically turns off outside of fights. And I know this is the case because the Force is real in the movies, but if you understand what I'm trying to say, this oftentimes in games, something that exists in combat does not exist in the world, and something that exists in the world doesn't really apply in combat. But an example that's even better than Final Fantasy VII, in my opinion, that kind of illustrates this idea is Baldur's Gate 3. A lot of the spells and abilities you get in Baldur's Gate 3 100% have an out-of-combat effect. So like, for example, the halfling that needed that's poisoned, you can either use your a spell, or you can use a potion or an antidote. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. When stuff exists in combat and outside of combat in the world, and developers make sure to give those things values in both, I think that's the best. I'll make a video talking about this because I'm quite enjoying it, but the recent hit Where Winds Meet follows this same design ethos. Skills you acquire affect both combat and exploration, and they are the answers to the puzzles that the game presents. That cohesion matters to me, and when your abilities function seamlessly in and out of combat, the world feels a lot more believable, more immersive, and more respectful of its own fantasy. And in a Star Wars game especially, that commitment to treating the Force as something real goes a long way towards making the experience feel authentic. Alright, let's move on to defense. There are 3 ways to defend yourself, and the way the game approaches them is honestly one of my favorite aspects of its combat design. 2 of these defenses have both standard and precision versions, and that distinction is what gives the system its depth. The first is the regular block. Unlike most action games, holding L1 blocks incoming attacks, but you can't hold it forever. There is a stamina meter attached, and once it breaks, you're exposed. But what I like about block is that it's more than a safety net, it's a learning tool, and holding block lets you feel the rhythm of enemy attack strings, giving you space to observe patterns without immediately committing to perfect timing. Now, block's precision counterpart is the parry. Tapping L1 just before an enemy's attack connects will deflect the blow, heavily damaging their guard and often opening them up completely. Parry timing can feel intimidating at first, but really it's just about learning animation cues. Take a basic trooper for example. When his baton reaches this position, that's your signal to press L1. Another great enemy that you could use to practice are the spiders on Dathomir. If you isolate one and you watch it closely, you'll see them shake and briefly pause right before they strike. That pause is your parry window, and once you internalize these cues, parrying stops feeling like guesswork and starts feeling like deliberate and controlled defense. Now, this is the type of parry system that I personally prefer. I am not a huge fan of Rise of the Ronin or Wolong Fallen Dynasty, where you can hold block and still use the parry. That approach is far too forgiving for me, and it's also less risky. Fallen Order asks more of you, and I find that execution far more satisfying when it clicks. That said, this is where one of my biggest frustrations actually comes in, because you wouldn't think it, but parry behavior actually differs between the saber stances. In most cases, you'll never really feel a difference, but there are a few situations where you'll realize that there's limitations to one that the other doesn't have. So, for example, the single saber and the double saber do not function the same with every enemy. The double-bladed saber cannot consecutively parry. It can parry multiple spaced-out attacks in general. So, the example I'm thinking of is the Purge Trooper's triple attack. The single saber can parry all 3 hits cleanly, but the double saber cannot. Now, maybe it can, I actually fought the Purge Trooper over and over again to try to get the timing down, and I finally just gave up because I thought maybe it was just me. But as soon as I switched to the single saber, I was able to triple parry him on the first try easily. So I was forced to conclude that the double saber just can't do it, and it drives me insane. But that makes no sense to me because mechanically, a double saber has two blades, which make parrying easier, not harder, because you can parry with one end and swing it over. Instead, it's got Cal doing this awkward upward swing animation, which forces you to block the next hit instead of parrying it. So, because of that limitation, that brings me to the second type of defense that the game offers you, and that is the dodge. And I felt like the double saber actually worked much better with the dodge than it does parry, or guarding even. Dodge feels really good in this game, and for me it ended up being the defensive option that I leaned on the most. Now, there are three forms of dodging. Yes, you just press the button at the right time, but each dodge kind of has a different function, okay? Tapping B gives you a quick step. You can go sideways, forward, or backwards, depending on your input. Double tapping B turns into a full roll, creating more distance at the cost of commitment. So you see what I mean? Like, a lot of this game feels a lot like Neo 2 to me. You know, like I said, I'm not comparing them. I'm not saying Jedi Fallen Order, because like someone's in the comments going to say, I'm sorry, Fallen Order is not as good as Neo. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there is a familiarity with its control system. Just like blocking and parrying, dodge has precision versions. You can perfectly sidestep through attacks, or even just slip in place, letting an enemy strike pass inches from you. That versatility is what makes the dodge so strong. It's evasive without being disengaging unless you want to roll away, which even then, you're not completely out of combat. So, you're not really running away when you dodge, you're repositioning, and I love that kind of defense. I thought that the dodge was actually a stronger defensive tool than parry. Parry feels good to do, but especially once I realized that I couldn't triple parry the Purge Trooper and I wanted to use the double saber primarily, I leaned on the dodge. I know I already said that, but just stream of consciousness is a little bit adding some personality to these videos. So, one of the earliest abilities I got, and one I got a ton of mileage out of, is the dodge kick. It lets you cancel the dodge animation and go directly into your offense by pressing X immediately after completing the dodge, sending a kick that'll stagger enemies, or it just closes the distance and lets you move into your flow. Like big enemies like the Jotaz can't be like staggered with it, but it keeps the flow going. That move became my answer to the Purge Trooper when I was using the double saber, and instead of fighting the stance's awkward parry limitations, I just dodged through his follow-up attack, kicked to interrupt, and flow straight into the double saber's spinning heavy attack. It felt intentional, fluid, and earned. Finally, force powers are a third defensive option, and they can be used to even cancel out some unblockable attacks. Now, like I said, I didn't use slow, it's just plain old overpowered to me, and it really ruins the fun. So I would use push and pull a lot to like pull Purge Trooper out of his attack. But to be fair, you don't even need force powers to make people cancel out unblockables. Just being aggressive in combat will make them do that too. This game really rewards you being aggressive. Now, besides that, there isn't really a ton of nuance to Fallen Order's combat. And I don't say that as a knock so much as a limitation. The system is built around flow, reading attacks, defending cleanly, and converting that defense into offense, and I love that. On paper, that's a fantastic foundation. Cal's controls and some of the options that you have combatively, they feel like they're borderline S tier. He's right there. But the problem is, the game itself rarely asks you to earn that mastery. Now, I've made this comparison a few times, but I want you to try to think about comparing, like, maybe this will make the Neo 2 comparison make more sense. Fallen Order feels like the opening hours of Neo 2, before you do the first dojo mission, and you can only spend so many skills, and so you can't really open up your entire combat options, because the game limits you on spending on certain skills, and that's it. So you can get a few abilities, but until you do that first dojo mission, you can't unlock everything. Fallen Order feels like that's the entire game. Like, the entire game is just the beginning tree of Neo 2. You get some excellent tools, the kick, the weapon transitions, the way the dodge changes into offense, and so there's some real flashes of creativity and skill expression. But the big thing that really holds this game back to me is the enemy design. That's where the combat really hits its ceiling. Most enemies rely on very small, repeating movesets, and even on Grandmaster difficulty, they don't really demand that much adaptation. They hit you harder and the parry window shorter. That's it. But you can play aggressively, and I mean you can be very aggressive, and instead of punishing you for overextending, the game often really rewards it. In other action games, enemies commit to their unblockables no matter what, unless there's some other ability that lets you pull them out. They stick to their guns. They force you to respect their offense. In Fallen Order, if you apply enough pressure, enemies are often forced to abandon their attacks entirely just to avoid being run over by you. And that has a ripple effect. Defense in this game is thoughtfully designed, but enemies don't consistently test it. Once you understand the parry timing or dodge flow, encounters stop feeling like duels and start feeling like an exercise in momentum. And even some of the bosses fall into this pattern. Rather than outplaying you, they frequently have to rely on forced pushes to reset the fight, because if your defense is solid, you can simply just bully the mess out of them. And one fight that just had me laughing is Terran Malicos. He's framed as this philosophical and martial equal, someone meant to challenge Cal both physically and ideologically, but mechanically, he cannot sustain that threat. He talks a big game, but he got his ass worn out by an 18-year-old boy quick. Now I'll be honest, I might be more forgiving than I should be, because getting to play this fluidly with a double-bladed lightsaber is a dream. It's a bully weapon and it fulfills a major Star Wars fantasy for me. But that enjoyment comes from power fantasy, not from challenge, and those two things aren't the same. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the game has to be difficult to be fun. I earned how easy this game felt by mastering its systems. I simply mean that the game's potential is limited because the enemies are designed in a way that they basically fold under pressure, in my opinion. The tragedy is that the combat system is ready for more, the enemies just aren't. Now, outside of combat, the game holds up really well. The level design strikes a strong balance between atmosphere and aesthetic. I will say that the parkour I think felt much better in an industrial setting or Imperial occupied spaces. Areas like Kashyyyk or Zepho, where you're in kind of natural environments, the wall running and traversal sometimes just felt forced, like, stuff was set there so you could travel around it, versus the industrial, it just seemed like it mixed in better. Maybe that's just me. Now, the puzzles were fun, they were never really difficult, but they weren't exactly brain dead either. And I think they provided a welcome, enjoyable break from combat. Now, though the enemies are what keep Fallen Order from being truly great, like S-tier great, I do think that this is at the very least A-rank combat. And despite the limitation, it's still good. It's really good. I enjoyed my time with it. Cal is a solid protagonist, Cere and Grease are likable and grounded, and the story does a commendable job of sticking to classic Star Wars themes and tropes. It may not reach the heights that it could have, but it reminded me why I ever cared about this universe in the first place, and that counts for a lot more than I expected. Even as someone who's been openly disappointed with the direction Disney has taken Star Wars, Fallen Order genuinely surprised me. I went in cautious and skeptical, bracing myself for another reminder of what the franchise struggled to be. But instead, I found a game that quietly understands the heart of Star Wars. The lightsaber combat feels deliberate and grounded, rewarding patience, control, and even aggression, while the story stays personal and sincere, anchored by characters who feel vulnerable, human, and worth following. The game isn't without flaws. There are bugs, stutters, and rough edges, but in an odd way, those imperfections feel like an honest reflection of where Star Wars is right now. Fractured, inconsistent, but yet the heart of Star Wars is somewhere beneath the surface, if anyone was able to find it. And if you're willing to push through that unevenness, There are moments that remind you why this galaxy ever mattered at all. And for me, when the credits rolled, I felt like Luke standing alone, looking out on the horizon as the sun sets. And just beyond the desert that is current Star Wars, there's a light, illuminating a new thought that maybe, just maybe, if Star Wars is ever in the right hands again, it may have a new hope. Okay, so to end this video, I want to do things a little differently. Since Star Wars is my favorite and I love the Jedi and Sith, if you've made it all the way to the end, leave me a comment and tell me what kind of character you would be in Star Wars if you could. And so, like, would you be a smuggler? Would you be almost like you were choosing a character in Star Wars The Old Republic? So what kind of character would you be? Would you be a smuggler? Would you be a soldier? Would you be a Jedi or Sith? And if you would be a Jedi or Sith, what type? So, like, you know, there's Consular, there's Sentinel, you know, that kind of thing. Tell me the kind of lightsaber you'd use and the color lightsaber crystal you would use. Okay, so would you have a single blade? Would you have a double blade? Maybe have the curved blade so you can do Form 2 like Count Dooku, you know, something like that. So yeah, let me know in the comments what kind of character you'd be in Star Wars if you could. With that, we'll end the video here. Give me a like, comment, and subscribe. The next video is likely going to be Jedi Survivor. And let me tell you, I said that the double saber was a bully weapon in this game. Oh my god, the double saber goes crazy in Jedi Survivor. So if you're interested in seeing that, I'll give you a little preview right here to end the video with. So hopefully this gets you excited. Give me a subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.